Today I want to talk with you about the indie game Wake of Poseidon. Dear developer of this game, I want to give you some feedback. The art style of the game looks absolutely fantastic. The combat, however, isn't nearly as juicy as it could be in my opinion. Welcome to Jonas Plays Your Game, the series where I give you feedback on your games and prototypes. Let's go figure this out. Chapter 1. Perspective. And with perspective I obviously mean the camera angle. I definitely wouldn't change it, it has a very unique look. At the same time I think it's important to talk about because this is where a lot of the issues are coming from. What you can do with this perspective is showing a three-dimensional surface, which is cool because your game doesn't need to take place on a 2D plane and the developer made good use of this. There's a lot of three-dimensionality in the level design. What you cannot do with a perspective like this is judging where things are in 3D space. So if things are not touching the ground, if they are not ground-borne, you cannot tell where they are in 3D space. There's no way, because this is an orthographic perspective, meaning everything has the same size no matter how far or close it is to the camera. And the game plays a lot into that exact weakness. Both enemy bullets as well as your own bullets are very often flying through 3D space, because obviously when the combat is not taking place on a 2D plane, some enemies need to shoot up, some enemies need to shoot down, sometimes you need to shoot up, sometimes you need to shoot down. And in cases like that, it's just not possible to tell where bullets really are. You can clearly see that the developer is aware of this issue and try to fix it by adding shadows to all of the bullets. And the shadows get bigger when the bullet gets closer to the ground. That certainly helps, especially when fighting in a two-dimensional terrain. It is still a lot more confusing than it should be though. Understanding where the bullets are is not as straightforward as in other games, and it is quite taxing on your brain, which means as soon as there's a certain amount of bullets you just can't process it anymore. You don't even understand which shadow belongs to which bullet anymore. Long story short, I think this art style in combination with this perspective and this amount of three-dimensionality is not compatible with a bullet hell game. At the very least it doesn't really play into your strengths. Luckily, there are a couple of simple things you can do about this. Chapter 2. Combat. First of all, I would pretty much only use round bullets for the enemies, because I feel it's way easier to tell where they are compared to the lines. The reason being that a ball with a shadow has pretty much the same format as the player character. The player has a vertical alignment, a ball with a shadow has a vertical alignment. If the ball-shaped bullets are flying at the same height as your head, you basically just need to dodge them with your head, which is pretty intuitive. The size of their hitbox is easier to judge and they look pretty much the same from every direction, which makes them easy to recognize. And one more important point, ball and shadow together look more like a unit that belongs together, whereas a laser beam with a shadow almost look like two different projectiles because there's such a big gap between them. Which brings me to point number 2, make the shadows of the projectiles a little weaker. If they are that strong, it really just confuses me because I'm always thinking, do I need to dodge the shadow? Do I need to dodge the laser? Just make the actual bright, shiny laser thingy the thing you need to dodge with your head, and use the shadow as something that is barely visible and helps to anchor the projectile in 3D space. Point number 3, I would highly recommend you to reduce the amount of bullets that are on the screen at any given time. As I've said earlier, I don't think this perspective is super suitable for a bullet hell game, and there are a lot of good alternatives you can use to make your game harder. First way of keeping the difficulty at the same level while reducing the amount of bullets, just make enemy bullets a lot faster and slightly bigger. Secondly, don't let the player start with 27 lives. What about 5 lives? Thirdly, why not create a couple of melee enemies, so enemies that get right in your face and try to mess you up. And fourth point, there are other ways to do ranged combat than bullets. For example, enemies could have little grenade launchers, and then you give the player some feedback where the grenade is going to hit. You make a little red circle on the ground, and then all the player needs to do is to get out of that circle in time. Telegraphing attacks like that would be way more suitable for this perspective, because you can see the surface you're standing on and you can react to that way better. So I think that is how you could bring more clarity and readability into the combat. Chapter 3. Combat. Again. Okay, so let's talk about combat some more, because that's pretty much the main meat of the game. You are competing with games like Transistor or Bastion, so your combat needs to be pretty much perfect. I mean, this game is definitely already on its way to get there. There are just a couple of things that need to be stepped up in my opinion. One of them being the readability during big fights, of course, but we already covered that more than enough. First of all, I'd like to see better visual feedback whenever I get hit by an enemy, because it is very hard to learn and improve when you don't realize you made a mistake, which happened to me all the time. Yes, you can tell when you die, but you can't really tell when you get hit with all of that action going on the screen. Another feedback thingy that would give you a lot of bang for your buck is knockback. So whenever you hit an enemy, the enemy should get knocked back. Even if it's just a little bit, it can help to make your guns feel a lot more powerful. And I love how this enemy is pushed away. This makes such a big difference. The knockback makes the weapons feel so freaking powerful. It's absolutely beautiful. So maybe a little more of that. And I'd also like to see a directional death animation. That means a death animation that reacts to the direction the enemy was last shot at from. So yeah, basically a knockback for the death animation, if you will. Here you can see what I mean in Gun Kit 99. Even the explosions are knocked back. Oh, here an example from my own game. Because the spike was coming from the bottom, all of the particles are basically flying to the top. So long story short, for the enemies I want death animations that react to how the enemies were killed. Because it's pretty much guaranteed that that will increase the satisfaction level of the combat. Why is that the case? I think it's just a matter of you're basically showing the player that your decisions matter and that the world reacts to your decisions accordingly. Honestly, you might want to rethink your death animations anyway. They don't really fit into the style all that well in my opinion. I'd consider going for something more neon heavy, like the bullets and the rest of the level design. That might work a little better. Chapter 4. Sound. I start feeling a little bit like a grumpy grandpa that complains about everything. Don't worry, I'll have some encouraging words at the end, okay? What really irritates me about the sound is the mix between very old school 8-bit retro sounds and modern sci-fi laser sounds. Now to give you an example, this is what I would consider a modern sci-fi laser sound. But most of the stuff you can hear here is crunchy 8-bit retro sounds. This combination doesn't really work for me. I would decide either for one or for the other, but not for both. Sure, you can also try to go for a modern take on old retro sounds, but at the moment that's not the case either. It's really just old retro sounds mixed with new modern sounds. I personally can't handle it, maybe you can, I don't know. Also, considering the style you're going for, I would lean more towards modern sounds. This is a very modern take on old retro graphics, and the more modern sounds you have in the game so far fit a lot better than the old retro sounds in my opinion. Plus, they are less annoying. Chapter 5. USP? This is another thing I've been wondering about. What is the unique selling point of this game? At the moment, it's a pretty polished twin-stick shooter with a unique look. Problem being, there are a lot of polished twin-stick shooters with a unique look out there. I mean, sure, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time you make a game. It can be completely enough to make a super polished twin-stick shooter. I just mean, considering all the competition that's out there, it wouldn't hurt to make the gameplay a little more unique either. Doesn't need to be something big. I would definitely choose something that ties into existing mechanics, either into jumping or into shooting. For example, I've realized that during combat you jump a lot to dodge bullets. What if we made that interaction a little more interesting? Let's just say you deal damage to all enemies around you when you land back on the ground after performing a jump. And to stop you from spamming the jump button and make that decision a little more interesting, let's also say you can't attack while performing a jump. That's just an idea. You can, but you don't need to use it. I just thought that the jump is probably the closest thing you have to a unique selling point, because there are not a lot of twin-stick shooters that involve jumping, so why not put a little more emphasis on that? The advantage of having a unique selling point is that it's way easier to pitch your game to others and to your potential players. Do you want to play my game? It's a twin-stick shooter. Does not sound as interesting as, do you want to play my game? It's a twin-stick shooter where you can also deal damage by jumping. You see? It sounds a lot more intriguing. It doesn't need to be exactly that, but something like that wouldn't hurt. Chapter 6. IDK, lol. The reason why I've been so harsh to this game is because I see a lot of potential. I don't want that potential to be wasted, and in fact I know this will turn out to be a very good game, because when I saw this game a couple of weeks ago, you could only shoot to the left and to the right. You couldn't shoot in all directions. Some parts of the level design have changed. So in short, the developer is willing to make improvements, and to make quite drastic improvements and reworks. There are a lot of stubborn game developers out there that just want to stick to their vision. You, dear game developer, don't seem to be one of them, so I'm very confident this game will become absolutely awesome. I'm not implying you should listen to all of my advice at all. I'm just a random guy from the internet. Implement what you agree with, don't implement what you don't agree with. Keep putting your game out there, keep listening to feedback, and you have the chance to make an absolutely brilliant game. If you want me to play your game as well and give you feedback, check out the video description, I'll put a link there. This is Jonas on the journey to becoming a game developer with you. If you enjoyed watching, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.